I was initially going to call it Dealing with Deception, but as I started to go into the program of developing the sermon, it became very obvious to me that this is a far larger topic than just dealing with deception itself. Identifying truth, to be able to identify truth, is the foundation of everything that we know and believe. Okay, so it was 1978. I was sitting in my chemistry class in grade 12, and the teacher, Mr. Dean Burton, had just asked a question of one of the students, who then responded by giving a correct answer. Now, Mr. Burton then immediately responded by asking, "How do you know?" As a person who in my life had been accustomed to only being questioned or challenged when having given the wrong answer, I wondered what was going to happen in this exchange. The answer the student had given was correct by my standards, and yet was challenged as if they were wrong. I immediately pricked up my ears to pay attention to what was happening. I knew whatever came out of this interaction was going to be good. So the first question I considered was, did the teacher ask a question? Well, yes, he did. Did the student give the correct answer? Yes, he did. Well, the student responded to the teacher's second question by holding up the chemistry book and saying, "Well, sir, I read it in this book." The teacher then smiled and congratulated him on being able to get the correct answer from the book. So what was the takeaway for me from this interaction? The takeaway is that it is important, whether a concept or answer is right or wrong, to be able to know why it is so. Whenever you ask a question, challenge the answerer about the correctness of their answer. Why is this important? The reason is that we need to be able to justify why the answer we provide is correct. In fact, the Bible instructs us to provide the reasoning behind our answers. In other words, everything should be investigated. So, 1 Peter 3, verse 15 says, "But sanctify the Lord in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear." Not only does the Bible instruct us to be able to give reason, but it also approves of those who investigate what they are told. If we go to Acts 17, verses 10 and 11, we get to see a short segment of story. Reading from verse 10, "And the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so." So here we have someone investigating the scriptures, and looks like I've lost. Oh no, we've gone backwards. I don't know why. Just keep going. Sorry about this. There we go. Now we're in place. So this is the stage where the Bereans are being portrayed as studiers of the scriptures. To mindlessly regurgitate answers without being able to provide justification for said answers is to be a cult. This is why Adventism can never be honestly regarded as a cult, because the justifications for our beliefs come from outside sources, those sources being the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. If you cannot justify what you believe through the scriptures especially, and also the spirit of prophecy, then you are effectively part of a cult. Now, I have a question for you to think about. Have you been wrong or defeated in an argument? How did it feel? If you felt anything the way I felt when I'm wrong, then you will hate it. At the time these things occurred in my life, my response would be to go off with my tail between my legs and resolving to get answers. For reasons best known to God, these answers would sometimes take anything between 5 minutes and 5 years to gain. To be able to effectively reject error, you need to know what truth is. And I will be doing I'm doing this presentation as part of possibly 3. And in another presentation, I will be investigating why it's important, more important to know what truth is than it is to be able to know what error is. So the question is, how do we identify truth? Well, the answer is going to depend upon your circumstances. For us Adventists, the answer is self-evident. Hit the Bible and soak in every word. For those who are not even Christian, what is the answer? Believe it or not, the answer is going to be self-evident to Adventists as well, even if it is not so evident to the heathen. We'll come to this answer later on. Now, it has been discovered that there are only 2 ways in which we can receive truth. The first way, let's take a quick look here and see if I'm keeping up. The first way is observation. And the second way is through revelation. There are no other ways through which the acquirement of truth can be received. So let's look at observation. I've probably gone a bit too far forward there. That's better. Right. Is it cold outside? All right. You stick your head outside and this happens to you. Well, the answer is obvious. Yes, it's cold outside. You experienced the cold. Next question. What is the weather like? Once again, we stick our head outside and, well, we can enjoy the rain. Is George a short man? How do we get the answer to that? Well, we stand up next to a height gauge and we see how tall we are. What colour is blood? Well, if you've never bled and never seen anyone else bleed, you probably wouldn't know. But I think most of us have managed to cut ourselves at some stage in our lives and found that blood is red. What about this one? Are you wearing clothes for this Zoom meeting? Now, you will know the answer to these questions through observations. Okay, let's continue on to some that are not so easy to deal with. Remember, I said there are 2 ways in which we can receive truth. First one being observation. Second one being revelation. Let's take a look at this situation. Here we see a tombstone. Well, that's the observation part of it. What is the revelation part of this tombstone? The revelation part is the writing on this particular tombstone. If you bother to read this, you'll find that somebody was born at such and such a date, died at such and such a date. It even gives the reason why they died. They were killed by electrocution. But we can only gain this information by reading what's on the tombstone. What that means is that any time we read something, we are going to gain truth through revelation. All right, here's another observation. This is, we can see a city. What city is this? If you have been to this city, you probably know the answer already. And you will have known it through observation. For the rest of us, the answer comes through revelation. The revelation being that this is the city of London. And how do we know? Because somebody told us. All right. Let's go to the next bit of information. What is this word? Now, if you'd asked me the same question regarding this particular word, let's see, about 15 years ago, I probably would have had the same response as you, in that I wouldn't have a clue. However, it is a word and it's written in the South Korean script. And the word is image. How do I know? I know because I spent some time there and I took about 6 weeks to learn how to read the language. I tell you what, it was very helpful when I was up there, but let's skip to the next bit. So if I were to look at this, to some of you, it will look like bird's claws, bird tracks and that kind of thing. But for me, it actually means something. Something that either is sound or something that I understand. The first one, I don't really know, but I do know it says Choson-gu. The second one says Hangul. I know that the second one is referring to the South Korean language. But the only way I can get to understand these is through an interpretive framework. And this is why it is that when I look at something like what I'm just showing you now, Gödel, that the only reason I can understand that is because I have spent my young years gaining an interpretive framework by which I can understand this writing. And this is something we will look into at another time. I do remember when I was in South Korea that it was very confusing to start with. It took me 6 weeks, as I said before, to learn to read it. But I suppose the most humiliating thing about it, if you can call it humiliation, was going to primary schools where I was teaching some of the kids English, going out afterwards, waiting for the bus to go back home. The kids would come out and they would point to the words on monuments and they would start to read them out to me. I think they were trying to teach me, and to some degree they were, because by the time they were doing that, I was starting to gain a limited amount of understanding of how to read the script. Now, the problem we have is that some truths, cannot be achieved from within or without unless they be revealed. But before I continue, I need to digress a little and explain what I'm about to, the path I'm about to take. Back in 1906, a baby was born who became known as Kurt Gödel. I didn't get to know of his work until about 15 years ago, and for me that was probably a little unfortunate because he passed away in 1978. Now, Kurt Gödel was a mathematician. So everything he produced was written in mathematical symbols. His main claim to fame was the theorem of incompleteness. This is what it looks like written in mathematical language. Now, if you're anything like me, this is effectively South Korean script. You can look at it and it makes no sense at all. About the only thing that I can make sense of is this little bit here, AX, which would have to stand for axiom, TH, theorem, DF, definition, but that's about as far as I can go. So what was his work and what kind of person was he? Well, he was of such brilliance that he became a contemporary with Albert Einstein and other famous scientists of the day. Now, fortunately for us, other mathematicians grabbed hold of this particular bit of symbolism and rewrote it in language that us mere mortals can understand. What he has shown us is that there exist true statements about numbers that we will never be able to prove are true. And his results have been cited not just in mathematics, but also in computer science and philosophy. So what does that mean for us mere mortals? It simply means that not only in mathematics, but in all areas of life, there are things which we believe to be true, but cannot be proven to be true. But it is from all these unprovable truths that all other truths are founded upon. Let's consider one truth. And unfortunately, I don't think I have a slide of it, but I'll tell you what it is. The first truth that none of us can prove, but we all believe, and we'll say this in regards to ourselves, is I exist. So I exist. Can I prove it? Can I prove that I exist to you? Can I prove that I am George Tasker? Now, if you want to be really mean to somebody, you can totally ignore them when they're trying to talk to you. The very fact that they are talking to you is an acknowledgement on their part that you exist. And this then comes to the very next question. If I exist, then who am I? The answer cannot come from within. In fact, this very question presupposes the unprovable truth that I exist. You will find, as you think about this question, that all answers come from outside yourself. This is a good example of Gödel's theorem in action. I believe I know who I am, but am unable to prove it. Here's a second one. I learn. How do we learn? The answer is that no one knows. How do we prove that we learn? We do this by outside actions. Anyone who's in the education system will tell you the importance of external actions on the part of children that will demonstrate a change in their behaviour as proof of some kind of learning. It is interesting that 71 different learning models have been identified to date. And yet all we know that we learn and that we believe, sorry, I said that wrong. And yet we all know that we learn and we believe that we know how we learn. The problem begins when we try to describe how we learn to others. And that is another rabbit hole that could be chased down at some stage in the future. Now let's look at the truths that can only be received through revelation. Does God exist? Well, we believe so. If yes, how do you know? Once again, the answer has to be revelation. Where does this revelation come from? In the case of us Adventists, this revelation comes from the scriptures. How about news? Have you ever considered news to be revelation? Before you open the paper, listen to the radio or watch TV, there were a lot of things that you did not know that after having done those things, you now know. Because those things are acts of revelation. Now, if you're like me, when I was in primary school, I struggled with... I've missed it. Okay, I lost one of them. I struggled with multiplication tables. We'll back up one. Okay, multiplication tables. How did you find out the truths of them? How did you figure that they were true? Well, in my case, it was a teacher telling me it was multiplication tables up on the wall and continual testing to make sure that we had learned them good and proper. What about dietary guidelines? How did you learn what you should eat? I remember the time that our children were in preschool and they went to preschool, one day they came home and said, "Mum and Dad, is this healthy food? Our teacher said we have to eat healthy food." Where did they get that idea from? Well, it would have to be a revelation from their teachers. Okay. And then we go to books. All writing is revelation. Now, given that Gödel has proven that we cannot prove all truth, we are in a position of needing to start somewhere. We have to start with some unprovable truths and go from there. For this reason, we have to start with belief first and build upon that belief. We all have unprovable beliefs. There's a technical term for such beliefs, a priori. Now, I'll see if I've got that definition up on the screen. Okay. Nope. Okay, we'll come to that one in a moment. A priori is a term applied to knowledge considered to be true without being based on previous experience or observation. In this sense, a priori describes knowledge that requires no evidence. The Bible also has a term for unprovable beliefs. Faith. Hebrews 11 verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And the Bible looks with approval upon those who believe before the evidence manifests itself. If we go to the book of John, chapter 1, verse 45, or starting at verse 45, we have Philip findeth Nathanael and saith unto him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said unto him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip saith unto him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and saith of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." Nathanael saith unto him, "Whence knowest thou me?" Jesus answered and saith unto him, "Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. Nathanael answered and saith unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God. Thou art the King of Israel. Now, I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I'm wanting you now to look at the way Jesus responds to him. If we look at verse 50, if you read it first, and then think about the way that Jesus responded. And as I listen to this, I'm hearing Jesus express absolute surprise. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under a fig tree, believest thou? Wow, thou shalt see greater things than these. And he saith unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So not only did he express surprise, but as a consequence of that surprise, he gave Philip two promises. Sorry, not Philip, Nathanael. Thou shalt see greater things than these, and you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Jesus rewards Nathanael for his ready belief. But what about Thomas, also known as Doubting Thomas? Well, we go to John chapter 20 and we start at verse 27. We could go back a bit earlier, but essentially Thomas was told by the others, well, we've seen Jesus, and Thomas essentially says, I'm not going to believe he's alive until I actually touch him with my own hands. And at verse 27, he saith to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. Jesus said unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. You will notice as the story progresses, the evidence mounts, or as we like to say today, escalate. And yet, at the end of this particular story, God pronounces a blessing upon those who are able to believe without having all the evidence in front of them. It seems that Christ desires faith more than belief. This is manifest in the question he asked at the end of the parable of the unjust judge. If we go to Luke 18, verse 8, he asks a question right at the end of verse 8. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? In one dream that Ernie Noel had, Christ gave the following blessing. Blessed be the ones who believe before the evidence mounts. If you look at the story of Thomas and the blessing by Christ, it has become clear that as time progresses, that evidence demonstrating the supernatural will become more prominent as we get closer to the end of time. The question is, will we be able to believe before the evidence mounts? Now, the question you might ask is, why is it important to believe before the evidence is complete? Okay, so I'm coming back to my life experience. About 15 years after I had been in my last year in secondary school, I'm once again sitting in a presentation. Believe it or not, this was also a chemistry presentation, and the presenter was a candidate for a master's qualification in industrial chemistry. He was doing a presentation of his findings. At the end of the presentation, the lecturers listening in started asking questions. The questions were very pointed and challenging. In essence, they were looking for every possible reason to disbelieve his presentation. It took me a while to understand the fact that they were doing something similar to what the high school teacher had done, but at a much higher level. In essence, it was about being forced to believe by the strength of available facts. But if God is a God of free will, then forcing us to believe what he says is going to be against his character. If the evidence was to be blasted at us from day one, we would lose the freedom to choose to believe. This is why we see the Bible speaks so approvingly of those who choose to believe. They are taking advantage of the freedom offered by God to believe in him through faith. If you cannot believe except through the force of argument or evidence, at best, you are lining yourself up for a mark of the beast upon the hand. But if we don't have tools to identify truth and distinguish it from error, how do we find it? First, we need willing hearts. I'm sorry, I haven't been keeping up with the slides. So, there we go, willing hearts. Second, we need to be willing to pay the price, whatever that may be. And the third is prayer. The most encouraging part of this third point is that even the heathen pray to God for truth, and he answers their prayers. I read a mission story of one young man who saw what was going on in his heathen religion and could not accept what he saw. He was one day walking down the road and a dignified man was leaning against a tree who called him by name and told him that his prayers were answered. What prayers? There was nothing in his thought at that point in time regarding a conscious praying to God. In fact, the only gods he knew of were the gods of wood and stone. However, this particular gentleman proceeded to tell him what he needed to do. Now, I believe that this stranger was in fact an angel sent to tell this man that God had heard him. The fact that this man later gave his heart to the God of the Bible helps to solidify me in this belief. Sometimes it is the prayer of others that will achieve the target of the prayer accepting truth. So I was sitting in church in South Korea one Sabbath and had opportunity to have a conversation with a Burmese girl. Turned out she was the daughter of an Adventist pastor who had given his life to the message in Burma. As she and her siblings all grew up, every one of them departed from the faith. Their father prayed for their return to the faith to his dying day. About 5 to 10 years after he had passed away, all siblings had come back to the church. Okay, so what kind of truths do we hold that are taken to be true, even if they cannot be proven? The first and biggest unprovable truth can be found in Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God. right from the start, the Bible speaks as if the existence of God is established fact. Yet at the same time, this established fact is something that we are unable to prove, especially in the context of discussion with atheists. But the Bible does not seem to care about the concerns of atheists. It is a take it or leave it situation. In other words, the Bible is essentially saying, God exists. Not my problem if you don't believe it. In fact, I could go one step further and say that he says God exists. If you cannot believe this little statement, it's your problem. And I really don't care what you think about his existence. And by the way, he created the reality in which you now reside. Now, let me drive this home with a little religious joke that I heard many years ago. One day, a group of scientists got together, decided that man had come a long way and no longer needed God. So they picked one scientist as a representative to go and tell God that they were done with him. So the scientist walks up to God and said, God, we decided we no longer need you. We're at the point we can clone people and do many miraculous things. We don't need you here anymore. You can go your way. Now, God listened very patiently and kindly to the man. After the scientist was done talking, God said, very well, how about this? Let's say we have a man-making contest. To which the scientist replied, okay, great. But God added, now we're going to do this just like I did back in the old days with Adam. The scientist said, sure, no problem, and grabbed himself a handful of dirt. And God says, now hold on. You go get your own dirt. Now here is something that is unprovable to some and yet established fact to others. The existence of the supernatural. How do we know this to be so? We find the answer in the story of Elisha. So we're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 to 17. Then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, beware that thou pass not such a place, for hither come the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him, and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing, and he called his servants and saith unto them, will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet that is in Israel telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore he sent thither, horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. What you see here is Elisha with an established fact according to his senses, but at the same time completely imperceptible to his servant. And what this means is that there exist things in our reality that are real, and yet we have no way of proving or even perceiving their existence. When it comes to the existence of the supernatural, it's become very clear to me that there are those for whom the existence of the supernatural is very real. I have a wife and a son who can tell me stories that have either happened or are happening that can only have supernatural explanations. It's also clear to me that I personally do not perceive the supernatural very well, if at all, apart from what the Holy Spirit allows me to experience. So we have to start from somewhere, and we begin with a priori beliefs. These are foundational beliefs that we hold that generally cannot be proven from outside the Bible, that is. And here is a belief that all humans hold, regardless of religion, time, culture, or location, especially if you're an atheist. And the belief is this: reality makes sense. We'll come to that one in a moment. We all believe it. We believe that reality makes sense. We didn't need a Bible to prove that, to come to that belief. It came from our observational experience. But can we prove that reality makes sense? Only from a utilitarian context. In other words, we try something and see if it works. Now, here is a belief held by many who reject the supernatural. Our 5 senses give us a complete and accurate perception of reality. Unfortunately, that can be proven to be untrue, and this creates an opening for the existence of God. But what kind of beliefs do we have as Adventists regarding the existence of God? We have quite a few questions. First question being, what kind of attributes does this God have? And I like to start with a collection of attributes that I call the omnis. The first one, as you can see on the screen, is omniscient. To be omniscient is all-knowing. Second one is omnipotent, all-powerful. The third one is omnipresent, to be in all places simultaneously. The last one I'm going to address in the omnis is omnibenevolent. He cares for the whole universe and all of its creatures. Now, these come from these beliefs, we derive a number of other truths. One of them is that we are God's creatures. Number 2, God cannot lie, but he can keep a secret. Number 3 is that God wants us to know about him. Number 4, he wrote a book so that we would. Number 5, he has protected this book so that we can trust his word. And finally, he wants us to know the truth. Now, if something were to happen to you that you were unable to access this sermon after this particular presentation, there are a few truths I'd like you to take away. Number 1, be comfortable with unprovable truths. You will come across unprovable truths in all aspects of life when you think about it. Number 2, desire the truth above all else. This is why Jesus gave the parable of the treasure that was buried in the field, and how that the person who found that treasure gave up everything that he may gain it. Number 3, don't wait for complete evidence to believe. And number 4, be prepared to pay the price. If you can take these 4 things away with you, God will see your desire, and he will ensure that you are given the light of truth to take hold of. I pray that we all will value truth above everything else. Thank you, Craig.
Well, thank you, George. That was